So welcome everyone to today's webinar. If I haven't met you before, my name is Leila and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator with the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network. So thank you for attending the fourth webinar in our 8-part empowerment series entitled CCSN's Remarkable Cancer Survivors Guide to a Healing Diet. CCSN is pleased to welcome back Dr. Rob Rutledge and to introduce our special guest presenter, Erin Roman. Erin grew up in a family where food harvesting and eating together were central to well-being and connectedness. She graduated from St. Francis Xavier University in 2005 with a Bachelor of Science in Human Nutrition. She is a registered dietitian and has been working mostly in community settings with a focus on food security and traditional food practices. As the nutrition team lead at Inspire Health, Erin works to provide whole person supportive cancer care, focusing on quality of life and well-being. Following a healing diet is among the most powerful ways remarkable cancer survivors maximize their chances of healing and recovery. In today's webinar, Dr. Rutledge and a registered dietitian, Erin, will provide an overview of the components of a healing diet and address many of the issues people have about this very important topic. At the end of the presentation, our speakers will answer any of your questions. However, at any time during the webinar, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. For those of you who haven't attended an earlier webinar with us, welcome. And the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network is an organization working with cancer patients and survivors to learn about health system complexities, connect with others to plan action, and act to promote best care and healthier survivorship. If you'd like to learn more about CCSN, please visit us at our website at survivornet.ca. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available tomorrow on YouTube. In addition, the slides will be available on SlideShare. Links to both will be sent to the email you provided. Now I will turn things over to our presenters. Welcome.
Thank you. I am just so excited. It's just ridiculous that a grown man can be that happy. And partly because we get to present with Erin Roman, who's a registered dietitian at Inspire Health. And maybe Erin, I'll do the plug now. I mean, I have such incredible respect for Inspire Health. They're a world-class healing center, sponsored by the BC, British Columbia government, physicians helping to lead, and then a whole team of experts, including yourself. And so Erin, like, what's it like to work there? And like, what do you like about, working at Inspire Health?
Yeah, so I feel really lucky to be part of, hello everyone, for one thing, I'm Erin. And I feel really lucky for one thing to work with an interdisciplinary team. So we have physicians, exercise therapists, clinical counselors, and then the dietitian team. So we really take a whole person approach, and we also see patients from across Canada. We can see patients from across Canada for free for both one-on-one with us. So if you have questions at the end of this webinar and would like to see someone one-on-one to really look at what this means for you, please reach out. You're also welcome to see our physicians, exercise therapists, and counselors as well. And all of our services, again, are free. And we also have lots of classes online right now as well.
Yeah. Wow. And part of why I have such deep respect for Inspire Health is that it's scientifically based and like wisdom based as well, right? So, and that's what we want to kind of pull into our seminar today. And so I'm excited. I've been trying to learn about this issue for a long time. And I think I've learned a lot in the last year, but I'm really excited to have our expert here to guide us along as well. So think about this from a bigger perspective, right? The remarkable cancer survivors, and it's an 8-part series. How do you empower yourself? How do you create the conditions that facilitate or maximize your chance of recovery and healing and so on? And so obviously diet is a major component of this. But, and that has an important role in terms of minimizing chance of recurrence, helping with longevity if that's in your future as well. So obviously the physical side of this, but then our diet definitely influences the chemicals that are released within the gut. The micronutrients that get to our brain have a profound influence on how we actually feel, right? So we can actually take care of our bodies, facilitate that healing, and feel better emotionally. So again, food is super important on that side. Obviously, the function of your brain is dependent on getting those micronutrients there and less inflammation in your body so you can function better. Your body's stronger. And then food is also part of our culture. And so it is a mechanism or medium to connect with other people. And how you eat and how you eat with others is an expression of that kind of love and connection. And lastly, from a bigger perspective, because we're talking so kind of physically about what sorts of dietary things you need to take. Well, let's take a bigger perspective and say, well, how can you bring your love and spirit into this world? How can you nurture your body in a loving way? And when you start to get into that level of manifestation of your spirit, then you can see a bigger perspective here. So I'm hoping that this is one holographic experience of how to lead your life in a way that brings healing to yourself and to others. Okay, so then what I want you to walk away with today from this particular talk, the first thing is our body has this incredible healing potential, healing capacity. And by nourishing our body in the healthiest way possible, then we maximize the chance that that actually manifests. So we want to be smart about this. And there's a way that you can actually influence your health. Secondly, like everything else, I'm going to tell you, do your research, figure this out, get the information, tap into the expertise, find that registered dietitian and get the information, because that's the starting point. And then as you integrate, listen to your body. Trust your intuition. Does this feel right for me? Is this making me feel better? Your body has an incredible amount of intelligence. And as you use that, your diet can get better. And maybe I should do a quick full disclosure. So I became a vegan in December. My wife and I saw the video Game Changers. It was essentially professional athletes that converted from some meat in their diet to exclusively kind of a vegetarian-based diet, and how their performances increased. And so for the last 8-9 months, I've definitely felt stronger. I put on maybe 5 or 6 pounds of muscle. I haven't had any change in kind of any kind of adipose side of this, but I'm stronger, cardiovascular system's better, and so on. And so if I listen to my body, I know that by eliminating the animal products, I'm actually stronger, happier, sleeping better, more energy. All right. And lastly, this is such an important point, is that we have this human incarnation, we have this human body, and we need to take care of it like a mother would take care of a child or an infant. We love our bodies. And one of the ways we love our bodies is to nourish our bodies in a way that's right for us. So really it's the process for me is as important as actually what you decide and how you decide to do it, right? So the final result is the means and the ends are come together. Okay, so how are we going to talk about this? So I want to provide you the science as best I understand it, and then we're going to kind of go through the very practical things. What are the components of a healthy diet? And talk about supplements, this incredible science around the microbiome, which is essentially the bacteria in your gut, different types of diet, different myths, how to organize your shopping, some resources at the end of it. And again, chat your questions as we go. Within also the context, the Western context that I'm offering you right now is what I call complete cancer care or integrative oncology, which is using science and wisdom, both getting best of the conventional system, the empowerment piece, and then empowering your body physically, working with the kind of mind, the psychological aspect of your care, and nurturing a spiritual life that transcends and brings in bigger values into that process. So again, I'm trying to do this as a scientific, from a scientific perspective. Okay, when do you reach out to the Erin type, characters, experts of the world? I would say diet is so incredibly important that I really think you need to talk with an expert. You need to talk with your physician, your family doctor, for instance, or maybe the oncologist if you have some questions around how treatments may interact with diet. But really, most cancer centers have some type of nutrition, dietitian expertise. I would recommend it for everybody. It's so important. They can work with you where you're at, how you might make that next tweak, the next transformation. But we especially think about it, the dietary part for people with weight loss or weight gain. People have issues around getting enough food in, or having diarrhea, constipation. And Erin, I'll ask you around this question as well. Is this, how is it that you work with people around their relationships with food?
Yeah, so we know that, we all have had and grown up with different relationships with food. Some of those issues may include accessibility, affordability, also body image issues, or restriction cycles that we may have been, or dieting that we may have gone throughout our lives. So that's something that I think is really important when we're trying to set out not a diet going forward, but more so your whole nutrition approach and what is sustainable for you and what's accessible for you. We really need to also look at, some nutrition appointments end up feeling a little bit like a counseling appointment at times, but they also need to be, and we're kind of well versed in trying to look at those issues. Hopefully you find a dietitian who's well versed in looking at those issues from the root causes of the choices, why we're making the choices that we're making, and how to move forward in a healthy way.
Sweet. Yeah, it's so important that we see the kind of bigger perspective there. And then we want something that's sustainable and long-term and feels good and makes you feel better. And so we want something that's going to be workable for the long term, and not this kind of sense of restriction. It's more like, I love myself so much that I want to eat those healthy foods. And I don't no longer feel like I want to eat that cookie or that cake or that type of thing, because I know what my body needs and wants. So I'm hoping we can kind of get that side. I also wanted to point people to the fact that from a scientific perspective, these other kind of physical life habits have as important a role in terms of changing the chemistry, in terms of empowering your body, in terms of making you feel better and giving you the best chance of recovery. So maintaining a reasonable weight and also exercise. And we went over those in the last session, but I also want to just make sure it's one big picture, one big healing perspective. All right, so a little bit of a repeat of why is it that we develop cancer, and maybe how is it that diet contributes to the development of cancer, or how is it that after we get a cancer diagnosis, we can actually influence how those cells may grow. So cancer begins with normal cells, and they get dozens of mistakes in them, and it changes the cell over. And the diagram on the right side of the screen is actually happening over decades. So the normal cells are slowly turning over. Inflammation often increases that turnover. But you get more and more turnover happening as the years go by. You get some damage, you get more damage. When you get enough damage, the cells become so abnormal that they begin to grow in an uncontrolled way. So that kind of defines the cancer process. So therefore, we have time in some sense to have an influence. And the big perspective for me is, don't turn the slow growing cells. If you have slow growing cancer cells in your body, and it's always gets possible for all of us, is we don't want to perturb them or change them further into fast growing cells. So damage causes them to turn into cancer cells. Further damage causes the slow ones to go into fast ones. So let's slow down or reverse that process wherever possible. So the takeaway is, for your type of cancer, if you know something's good at reducing the risk of that type of cancer, then that's the type of lifestyle and diet that you should be doing after you get that type of cancer diagnosis. And alternatively, if you know there's a certain something that increases the risk of your type of cancer, then you want to be able to avoid that particular activity or diet. Epigenetics. So this is also, so far I'm just talking about what happens inside of the cancer cell. The genes and chromosomes, the words and instructions that tell the cell how to work can get changed. But there's huge amounts of science that says it's also the kind of chemicals around the cells that actually influence cell growth. And so I'd say that's epigenetics. So change the soup to the healthiest soup possible. So it's the chemicals around the cells that can drive the cell growth or the cell turnover. And one of the important ideas is we want to work towards an anti-inflammatory diet and lifestyle, because inflammation, or you think of it as irritation of the tissues, releases these chemicals into the bloodstream. Those chemicals go everywhere. Those are the chemicals that make you feel tired, by the way. But the chemicals can cause damage to the cells, and they also kind of prime the cells to keep turning over. And we don't want that. We want this to kind of be in the kind of regular stream of things. And so by choosing an anti-inflammatory lifestyle with stress reduction, by bringing your spirituality into this, you can actually settle those things down, and it helps on all of those fronts. Okay, I'm going to hand this over partly to you, Erin, right now. Why is the microbiome so incredibly important? Like why do we now talking about the 100 trillion friends that are in your gut, essentially?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So the microbiome, we're learning so much about the microbiome today, and the research has exponentially grown in the past, I'd say, especially in the past 1 to 5 years. So like Rob said, there's over 100 trillion bacteria in our gut. And those bacteria are involved in so many processes, including hormone regulation. Like, I don't know if many people know that about 90% of our serotonin, which a lot of people know is one of our quote unquote happiness hormones, is actually made in the gut. So we're seeing a huge connection between the microbiome and the state of the bacteria that are living. I like to think of it like a forest. We want an ecosystem there. We want a diversity of bacteria, right? We don't just want one kind of tree. We know that doesn't work with that monoculture when we're looking at forests. So we want a nice diversity, all the different fungi and all the different species. And the most important thing is that we have those species there, and then that we feed them. So, and I know Rob will go through this, and really whole foods are the types of foods that really feed that bacteria. And we want to make them work, right?
Yeah.
If we're having a more refined product, then the bacteria don't have to work that hard because it's already really been broken down for us. We want to make those bacteria work. So overall mental health wise, overall like stool and bowel movements, it's just so essential that we look at the microbiome and how we can support it.
Yeah, it's critical. And you're right, it's just blossoming research there.
Yeah.
So those bacteria are actually allowing us to absorb food. Incredible influence on our immunity. It's like 80% of the kind of T cells and other cells that help fight off viruses, coronavirus, all that stuff is actually coming through the gut. And really, as Erin is saying, when we have what I would call a bad diet, which is like the processed food, the refined foods, you actually kill off species of bacteria. I heard that somebody who went on like a McDonald's diet for a week, they had killed off like 10,000 different types of bacteria in 1 week, because there's, and you want that kind of full variety. The other super important one is this idea that when we have a diet that's irritating, the gut gets kind of thinned out a little bit, and some of the bad chemicals can get from the gut into the bloodstream, called leaky gut syndrome. And that also leads to all sorts of other chronic illnesses and problems. So we need to feed our bacteria. Erin, I don't think I mentioned it otherwise, so maybe you can jump in here and say around this idea of prebiotics and what's the kind of philosophy of that?
Yeah. And before I get to that, I just saw a question about a low fiber diet. So there's definite ways that you can be healthy on a low fiber diet if need be. We often see this in ovarian cancer type diagnosis. So please reach out to me. There's ways of making the foods more digestible and lower fiber, but still full of nutrition. So please do reach out on that one. So when we're looking at a lot of the talk has been around probiotics for years, right? And I saw a really amazing researcher, Natasha Haskey, who only looks at the microbiome, and she was explaining how we put the cart before the horse a little bit in terms of probiotics and prebiotics. Again, we want that ecosystem, we want that forest. So we don't want to be on a probiotic for a long time, because as Rob said, there's 100 trillion bacteria. We've only really synthesized probably about 20 to 40 strains of different bacteria. So we don't want to just take those same 5 to 10 strains in our probiotic for a long period of time, because the thinking is that we can overcrowd and push out some of the other bacteria. So yes, there's a place for probiotics, especially after taking some antibiotics, but definitely consult a physician or a dietitian in terms of which strains are best. But the part that we really want to do is once those bacteria are camped out and really into our gut, we want to feed them. So that's the prebiotics. So prebiotics are found in things like onions and garlic and these resistant starches that we're now learning more about, which can come in like a sweet potato that's been cooked and cooled. Like, it's fascinating research to see where we can get this really good fiber from in these different kinds of prebiotics to feed the bacteria.
Yeah, and I guess what I hear is, what I hear is like adding variation to our diet we're essentially ingesting different types of bacteria, and that's a good thing. So the more the variation in the fiber and these prebiotics help to grow a nice forest of bacteria. Super important. Thank you. So then how is it that diet, so what I'm trying to do is set up the kind of the understanding, and then let's turn this into how diet actually helps to contribute to healing of the cancer. So as I said before, we don't want the slow-growing cells turning into fast-growing cells. And the antioxidants, which are found in fruits and vegetables, essentially are chemicals that mop up the damaging chemicals, right? So they go in and kind of stop the damage from happening further and stop the kind of stimulation there. Then we're also trying to change the soup, because for instance, if we have these sugary drinks and we get high levels of sugar in our bloodstream, our body responds by putting in insulin to try to get the blood sugar into the cells, but it also puts out other chemicals. So the sugar is priming the cells to actually grow faster. So we don't want that extra signal there. I'd say change the soup, change the conditions. You obviously improve your immune function when your diet is healthy. It has the capacity to identify certain types of cancer, to see them as foreign and therefore remove them. And then lastly, it's back to this feeling of like energizing your body, so that even though we scientifically can't say exactly how it works, by energizing your body, you're releasing that kind of innate healing potential, whatever the mechanism is. And then I would just say that I believe that there's something metaphysical that happens as well. When you love your body, it's almost like a level of consciousness comes in. It has some type of influence at the physical level. And although I can't prove it or I can't explain it, I do think there's something else that can happen that contributes to the miraculous in the circumstance. Okay, so principle. So if that's how it can work, so then what do we do on the day-to-day? And I mean, there's a lot of controversy, and why I'm very happy for Erin to join us to kind of answer the nuances around it. But if you look at like big principles, like the remarkable cancer survivors from these various sources that I've been talking about kind of follow these bigger principles for the most part. Eat food. So that is not chemicals. I guess that's the kind of differentiation. So make it food as in what your great-grandparents ate from 100+ years ago. Mostly plants. The plant-based diet we're going to talk about mostly, and obviously not too much. So that's Michael, I forget his last name, who coined it. Say it, Polak? Pollen, thank you for that. We think about this, so the veggies are so helpful in my mind that I would suggest that it's 50+% of the plate is actually the veggies and kind of the fruit side of it. The carbohydrates. So the idea is if the carbohydrates are refined, they get into the bloodstream too quickly and they spike the blood sugars too quickly. So we want a complex carbohydrate, and neither kind of starving ourselves of carbohydrates nor having ourselves on very high levels. It's this kind of balance of micronutrients from the various sources at every meal. So I'd also say you're adding the protein to the carbohydrates, because that also slows down how quickly those carbohydrates get into the bloodstream. I would say, and Erin is going to give some of the nuances around that. So the proteins from mostly non-meat sources, with less meat, we'll talk about this, or no meat is what I'm going to suggest. Healthy fluids and fiber, feeding, making sure your cells are healthy because they're hydrated, and the fiber because it helps the microbiome. And then the principle is your body needs all sorts of micronutrients and minerals and the energy from this. And so if you eat multiple types of food at each meal, or at least within a single day, then your body can kind of the cells can absorb the critical elements and keep themselves healthy that way. If we're going to supplement, I can say vitamin D for certain. We're going to talk about this later. B12 if you're a vegan. And then again, I'll be a bit more pragmatic, saying you don't need anything else, but your physician may prescribe something, or they may have some particular deficiency in which the physician is going to want to add something else. And lastly, big picture is we want you to be happy and healthy in the long term. So you're going to kind of maintain that kind of ongoing, loving, caring diet. Erin, do you want to add an extra principle at this point?
I think that that's a great summary, and Robbie already mentioned it in terms of like the intuition and loving your body. I think there's a big connection between how we think about food, and once we have the knowledge of the benefits of the nutrients that we're consuming, then it actually, interestingly, it lays down these neural pathways. So the more we know about these positive associations with what food is doing for us in our body, the more our body actually then wants them. So it's reinforcing these positive messages and laying down new roads in a way in our brain, if this is new for us, to look at how we can increase wanting those vegetables. So that's part of that intuition as well, but there's actually like this biophysical aspect of our brain chemistry for it as well.
Wow, that is so cool, because I've heard from a number of people who've turned into like a vegetable-based diet. They're saying that after a few months, it feels like they taste the food even more. They have a much greater sensitivity to the beautiful taste of those vegetable-based foods. Yeah. And it could be that the mindfulness piece is adding to the kind of neural feedback. Wow.
Yeah.
That is really cool. Now there's a little explanation there. So I have the big 4 food groups. So I'm not using, the classic one. I would say veggies, fruits, whole grains, and then the kind of non-meat proteins like legumes, beans, seeds, and nuts. So I want you to think about that, because if you keep going to the experts, you'll keep coming back to this kind of same recommendation. Obviously, then we're trying to avoid the junk foods, right? Those sugary drinks that are just filled with fructose, just incredible damage to the liver, to the whole system. Stay away from the processed foods. Nurse that works with me, she's talking about, when they remove the fat from certain dairy, they put in kind of emulsifying product that can also be irritating to the system. So that's part of the processing. And I'd say avoid red meat, or really cut back on the red meat side. Okay, we're going to go over the myths now, or put their dietitian on the spot. So what do you say when people say, well, sugar feeds cancer, therefore I should be eliminating fruit because fruit has some sugar in it? How do you work with this?
Yeah. So I see this is a question that I answer every day. I would say it's very much in the media, it's very much in the literature right now that we're seeing around nutrition and cancer. So Dr. Rutledge started to explain it a little bit in previous slides around the connection between insulin. We know that insulin and glucose, which is what sugar turns into in the body. We know that insulin is like the key that turns the cells in terms of letting the glucose in. But what we've also seen is by having too much insulin in the body, so if we have more refined sugars, so sugars that have really been broken down ahead of time. If we think of our body a little bit like a machine, are we doing the work? Are we doing the breaking down of the food? Or has it already been broken down for us? So it's not strictly about carbohydrates, because a lot of patients will link sugar and carbohydrates, but what's the quality of that carbohydrate? Again, has it been broken down ahead of time? Is it super fast to get into our cell? Like a plain white sugar as an example, if it's that fast to get into our cell, if we don't have the fiber of, say, a piece of fruit that comes along with lots of minerals and antioxidants and vitamins that helps to slow down that glucose in our system, then our body can sometimes get a little bit confused and also let out too much insulin. So then we have this extra insulin, which we know is associated with those inflammatory processes. So again, it's not that we can like never have those foods ever again, but it's also how do we have them? If we're having something that's a little bit more refined, can we have it with a meal that has the fiber already, that has the protein in that meal already? How can we slow that down? Even if we're having a big bowl of fruit, we might want to consider having a couple of nuts on the side, just to again make this like low, slow burning fuel. That's our goal, is to create a slow burning fuel for our body.
Nice. Wow. Yeah. So there's a summary: insulin leading to inflammation, adding the protein, get the slow burn, what they call a low glycemic diet, meaning the glucose levels don't spike and drop a lot. It kind of stays in the middle range, which is very the healthy range. Great stuff. So I'm advocating for no or little red meat. Colorectal cancer, definitely. There's different other types of cancers that are associated with red meat. And what I think about it is that the red meat kind of irritates some of the gut. We lose some of the healthy bacteria during this, especially if you're eating large amounts, and it leads to inflammation. So instead, if you want to go on the animal side of things, I think fish, a serving per week or a couple of servings per week, I think is quite good. Again, you want to do your research in terms of not, eating fish like swordfish and other fish like that have high levels of mercury and other metals. And then, tapping into the kind of healthier wild fishes. Yes, the kind of the breast of the chicken or turkey is also the healthier meat than the red meat. Any tweak around that, Erin?
Yeah, and I would say too that these are also, generally speaking, also, tune in with your physician or your dietitian in terms of whether at the moment what's most appropriate for you and what you can digest in terms of different kinds of protein, and work with someone. If you want to decrease your red meat, that's great. But let's have a conversation of making sure you're getting enough protein in otherwise, and getting in enough iron and the nutrients that you may have been having previously in the red meat.
Yeah, there's where the expertise really comes into it, right? And so there are some people that it's a good thing for them to have some red meat because that's how they get those particular nutrients. Okay, so Erin, a lot of people will say, you're a vegetarian. Where do you get your protein? Like, if you don't eat meat, you're not going to get protein. Well, how do you respond to them?
Yeah, there's so many ways of getting protein in through vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, legumes, and like nut butters, hummus, bean dips. You can have a very healthy diet without meat, and we can also have an unhealthy diet without meat. It's the same as if we were to eat meat and have. So it depends on the composition of your diet, but there's definitely ways within a vegan or vegetarian diet or pescatarian diet to get enough protein.
Yeah, wonderful. So me drinking beer every day is not going to be my protein replacement. Is that what you're saying?
Well, some folks might look at a vegan diet and think like only vegetables, but we really do need to make sure we're including those beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds.
Yeah. So again, broad from the 4 food groups and, lots of different types of foods. So the vegetables actually have the same building blocks, the little beads along the chain. They're called the amino acids for the proteins. And when you eat the muscle from an animal, that they have exactly the same little building blocks, the same little beads. So if you have the balanced vegan diet, you're going to get way more protein than you actually need, because if you have too much protein, it simply gets converted into fat. Okay, so it's the same idea. There's lots of different sources, grains, nuts, beans, in addition to the vegetables. The vegetables have it as well, like spinach and broccoli and all those things have proteins in them. Okay, so that's a slide of actually non-meat foods that have protein in them. And you can see the kind of variation, right? So it's not just the beans and lentils and chickpeas and all that stuff. Okay, I wanted to touch base on this idea of whole grains, because you can eat your white bread, which has wheat in it, but it's a processed wheat. It's too fine. It gets absorbed too quickly. And we lose out on the micronutrients in that refining process. So wherever possible, look for the whole grain alternative. And I've listed some of those on that side. Those processed foods, again, can irritate the gut. Any comment on that one, Erin?
Yeah, again, these whole grains are such beautiful, low, slow burning fuel. And they usually, actually, because they're containing more of the grain, they actually have more protein in them as well, which is great. I actually just experimented last week, my first time, with farro, Farro. And again, there's this misconception that all whole grains are also take a long time to cook, but it's not true. This farro only took about 10 minutes to cook, and it was this beautiful, nutty grain. So experiment. You can look into the bulk sections now to get smaller amounts of a grain. I like to, take a Sunday, cook up a new grain that I may not have before, and then I have it in my fridge that I can add as easily as a side dish, so I don't have to think about cooking it every night.
Wow, that's wonderful. And there's so many great options, right? Because really the grocery stores are delivering international foods now. So, Okay, so I wanted to take it back to partly the genesis of the series, so the remarkable cancer survivors. And folks would have heard me talk about Kelly Turner. So she's the PhD researcher who interviewed over 100 people who have undergone a spontaneous remission, which she called a radical remission. She called it radical because they changed their life in radical ways as well. And she found that there were certain consistent patterns and behaviors and attitudes to these folks. And as you'd imagine then, one of them is around diet. So the 9 factors, in fact, I put down 10 because she subsequently put in exercise as one of the factors. Now and it's just not a radical change in diet. Another thing I would say is there are some people who have a fantastic diet and still get a cancer diagnosis, or they have a really, really, really good diet, and so therefore they don't need a radical change in their diet. I think, to me, this is a more reflection of the attitude, the taking control of your health scenario. How is it that you can influence your health? How is it you can send that meta message from kind of consciousness or spirit level into your body, into your life? Well, one of them is to take care of your body and really, love your body through diet. And the second thing you'll see there in the light green is that they used herbs and supplements. Now, the side point to that is that there was no one herb or supplement that there's no common overlap. And for me, that means therefore there's a factor that goes above that factor, which is again, this proactive approach, this willingness to kind of take the steps, to do the research, to figure out what feels right for them. So again, it's this kind of attitude of proactivity and really making a difference, empowerment there. So from her book, she coined this phrase: no sweet, no wheat, no dairy, and no refined foods. Right. Well, that was the kind of the consistent pattern that she was seeing in the people who had undergone a remarkable remission. And on average, they were basically increasing the fruit and vegetable side. They were eating organic. They were drinking filtered water. So again, it's this consistent pattern of this is how to love your body to really make a difference in the long term. And the herbs and supplements, I'll just kind of summarize that. So there's no one home run. And I would say that 25 years ago when I first started giving these presentations, I didn't have the data, but subsequent to that, really the researchers have looked at kind of every kind of herb and supplement, try to figure out how it can make a difference, whether it makes a difference. So there's no home run, there's no shark cartilage, there's no SEAC that is the end all be all. And therefore, in terms of supplements, then what I'm recommending is 1,000 to 2,000 international units of vitamin D, because we Canadians don't get enough sunlight, probably 10 months per year. And vitamin D has actually been shown to have some anti-neoplastic effects. Now it's mild, but again, it's a very healthy thing to do for lots of different reasons, including your bones. And vitamin B12 is a 2.4 microgram dose if you're vegan, especially. Do you want to add anything there, Erin, at this juncture in terms of the recommended dose?
Sure. Yeah, no, I would definitely say, have the conversation. I know at Inspire Health, we're really open to having conversations about herbs and supplements that may have been recommended to you, or, anecdotally, there's anecdotal wisdom that comes from some of those supplements and herbs too. So always have the conversation. I think that's one of the things I see most often is patients that don't feel comfortable having the conversation. So find a professional that is there to listen and to explore those options with you.
Perfect. Yeah. I would say, because a lot of us are actually vitamin D deficient, I would recommend actually getting a blood test from your family physician, because then you could actually tweak or adjust your vitamin D intake to make sure you're into a healthy level. So that's one easy one. And then I really feel that if you have that balanced diet, you get that expert advice, and you really take care of yourself, then the need for anything extra beyond those couple, I don't think is there, unless again your physician is making that directive. Healthy fluids, yeah. So this is motherhood stuff, right? Stay hydrated. Tea, Erin, do you want to chat with that? Is there a healthier tea, or what do you like recommend to people in terms of kind of anti-cancer perspective?
Sure. I mean, we know that hydration is really important for overall systems. I think we underestimate it at times, how important being hydrated is. So herbal teas are a really great way actually of getting in some of that hydration. Just always check if it's a stronger herbal concoction, whether there's any interactions with your medications. But green tea is wonderful. We know there's great antioxidants in green tea. It also has some caffeine, so just that one's not always counted in terms of your hydration. So making sure that we're balancing our hydration if we're drinking a lot of green tea. Chaga mushroom does not affect your hydration. It can increase your hydration status, so that's a great one. Some of those mushroom teas are quite wonderful. And saffron, Rob, please tell me about saffron, because I have never had saffron tea.
Oh, well, you put a few little flakes of it on top of whatever tea you're drinking, and it actually adds quite a nice bite to the tea itself. But you don't have to put very much on it, and it's very expensive, but it's a very tasty tea adjuvant. So.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
We're big fans of rooibos tea as well. So rooibos doesn't contain the caffeine, but it does contain quite a lot of the antioxidants as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. So again, a great option for people. I like this one, or at least some of the people I've worked with have said, yeah, some warm water with some lemon squeezed in it first thing in the morning, like 15 to 20 minutes beforehand. It almost feels like it coats the lining of your stomach and just makes it easier to enjoy your breakfast. Again, Erin, you can chime in anytime. Obviously, we want to reduce alcohol consumption for lots of different reasons. And there's also these replacements. So you might like dairy milk, but you might actually like the taste of almond milk, or oat milk. I find is actually very, very tasty as well. And yet it doesn't take as much kind of energy to produce.
And it's usually local. Oat milks are usually Canadian versus the almond milks too.
Yeah. So sweet. Okay. Erin, coffee is bad. Is that right?
Not necessarily.
Okay,
again, another question we get all the time. So how does coffee make you feel is one thing that we always look at. It's especially when we're going through a diagnosis and we're at a state where our stress levels may be a bit higher. We know that stress reduction is really key. So do we want to add more stimulant to that to give us that jittery feeling? For some, they don't feel any difference with a cup, 2 cups of coffee, but they may feel 3 cups of coffee. For others, half a cup of coffee would give them the jitters. There's actually some good antioxidants in coffee for those that really want to have that endorsement. The lighter the roast, actually, the better. So some of those antioxidants really get burnt off in the darker roast. But we've seen in the research that 1 to 2 cups of coffee a day is okay, as long as that's not, again, increasing those feelings of jitteriness or heart racing or anything like that, because we want to keep the stress down.
Yeah, I also think about drinking your coffee earlier in the day, especially because with the half-life being about 8 hours, you drink it earlier so you kind of burn it off before you get to bed that evening. Again, but it's so individual, right? Because some people can drink a coffee before they go to sleep even. So, and the other one is like, this is meant to be enjoyable. If you really love the taste of coffee, then really enjoy it. And I'd say if you want to cheat with it, like blueberry cheesecake or something like that, like once a month, then really slow down and really taste every bite and just make it a wonderful experience, right? So we want to slow down and enjoy our lives.
The other thing I'll say is do you notice that connection with your sleep, right? We do know that sleep is so important. So is coffee affecting that? Could it be a factor? But we all experience it a little bit differently, but really enjoy it.
Take care of yourself. Okay, fat is bad for you. Stay away from fat. Is that true?
No, fat's essential. So we were fat phobic for probably the 80s and the 90s, and then now we're carb phobic. And again, for me, that's really like nutritionalizing and getting a little bit too specific, or even in a way too broad, and not looking at more of the nutrients that are within those macronutrients and the vitamins that can really help our body. So all of our cells really have a lipid layer that we need the fat to really support our body. It's the quality of fat that we want to look at.
Yeah. I used to say a low fat diet. Now I say a healthy fat diet is the way to say that. Right. So there are some types of fats that aren't good for you, but we do need it for, lots of things, our brain, our nerves, or the rest of it. And again, we can get those healthy fats through a balanced diet. Okay, so healthy oils. I've heard that olive oil is actually a very good oil, but you want it cold pressed and you don't want it to be too old. Is that right, Erin?
Yeah. So when we're looking at our oils, it also depends on how they're stored. So if they're stored in a clear glass bottle, chances are that they're going to become rancid more quickly, which we want oils that are not rancid, A, for flavor, but B, just for the nutrients that are in it. So, and when an oil's gone rancid, when you open it, it's got that like stale smell to it, almost like a bitter smell to it. So we want to avoid that. Especially oils that are, the good olive oils usually are stored in really dark glass containers, or they're in metal, those metal containers as well. So it keeps from the light from coming in. And I mean, I think it might be difficult to know how long an oil's been in a container, but really look for the oils that are not as processed. The cold press is great because then we know that they haven't used heat to degrade some of the benefits of the oil.
It reminds me of flaxseed also has an essential oils in it. And so if you're going to eat flaxseed, which I do, you're supposed to store it in a opaque container, and you're supposed to store it in a cool space because you don't want the oils to become rancid with time. You lose the nutrition. You don't kind of take care of the oils.
Yeah, and flax has so many benefits to it. And we don't want to buy ground flax. And we want to grind our own flax if possible, because we don't know how long that ground flax has been sitting on the shelf. So if you actually smell ground flax that's from a store that's been sitting on a shelf for a while, it kind of smells off versus if you get flax on its own, which the shell of the flaxseed is so hard that our little digestive systems cannot actually break it down. So we want to grind it up, but you can grind a bunch at one time, and then you can put it even in a bag and put it in your freezer. There's no light really getting to it. If you put it in your freezer or your fridge, it's nice and cold, and just scoop it out from there.
Wonderful. So grapeseed, avocado oil, again, it's hard to kind of maintain the quality, but there are some oils that are better when they get to high temperatures. So that's one of, I would also say avocado oil is better if you actually eat the avocado itself from the plant directly. Okay, so again, I think the principle that I learned from Erin the last few days is to get you healthy oils from multiple sources each day as well. So yeah, I'm getting a little nod there. So good. The omega-3 issue. So omega-3 is a good fatty acid, and we need to eat omega-3s because we can't produce it ourselves. So that decreases inflammation in the body, whereas the omega-6s do cause inflammation. And inflammation is not like all bad, because sometimes your actually body needs to kind of ramp itself up. You get a flu or something like that, you need to have those chemicals in place. The problem is that we get way too much of the pro-inflammatory stuff in our diet compared with the healthy omega-3s. And there are different ways to kind of get the omega-3s, including in flax, walnuts, and chia seeds, less so perhaps in the green vegetables. And then the other way, obviously, is the fish. So EPA, DHA is the kind of the direct molecules that are healthy. But again, you eating fresh fish, because the stuff that starts to get rancid or old, you lose the kind of the benefits from that molecule or the molecules. I just thought to put this in because this is kind of fun. Like you might even think about, well, how is it, in the midst of the winter, you might be able to burst your, improve your mood and so on. So there's some definite ideas there. We'll talk about chocolate there in a moment. And then brain food. So the other thing is that, by taking care of yourself, exercise, diet, et cetera, and there are certain foods that actually promote brain health as well. So I just thought to add that one. I'm a blueberry fan myself. Anti-inflammatory spices. Now, I think Erin, over to you. Maybe I'll do the first one. Turmeric. This has been a hot item for the last few years.
It has been, yeah. Oh, Rob, did we lose your sound?
Go for it.
Oh, there you are. Great. Sorry. Yeah, so turmeric's a great spice to cook with. It actually doesn't add, I don't find it adds like too much of a flavor when you use the spice itself. You could also use it in its whole form. It looks like ginger basically, but a little skinnier if you buy it at the grocery store. I tend to use the spice a little bit more myself. I find it a bit more convenient, but you could have it as a tea. You could put it into curries. I actually really miss turmeric because I got these braces on and I can't eat turmeric. But you could even put it into your vegetables when you're sauteing. Into your soups is a really easy way to do it. And some people even put it into their smoothies. It doesn't really change the flavor too much, but you get that antioxidant and that anti-inflammatory property from the turmeric.
Nice. We do put it in our morning smoothies when we have smoothies. So yeah, so this is, I think that's an easy one to actually be able to add to, and it tastes good and it's good for you. So how about ginger? Can you riff on ginger?
Very similar to turmeric in terms of how you can use it. So the most benefit that you would get from it is if you were to use fresh ginger versus the dried ginger in this case. But you can still use dried ginger. It tends to just have sat around for a little while, so you're not really getting the oils that are within the whole food. So you can grate it up. So if you can use your grater or one of those microplanes, the really fine ones, but you can just use your own grater at home and then get the fibers from it. You can make it tea, put it in stir fries. Salad dressings is a really nice way to use ginger. Again, put it in your smoothie with a bit of coconut flavoring, like coconut milk in there, and some banana is a really nice mixture. And soups is another beautiful way, like a squash and ginger soup or a carrot ginger soup is really beautiful.
Wonderful. And my wife is a garlicaholic, so she'll be quite happy for you to talk about this one.
Yeah, so lots of great antioxidants and anti-inflammatory properties in our garlic, and it's really there in any way. Some folks say that if you chop it up, to leave it for a couple of minutes so that you can get the oils really flowing from the garlic if you are to use it fresh, but I just use it in any way that I can. So add it into, fresh salsa, your guacamole. You can roast up a whole clove and in the oven, and then just like use that in like any kind of sauces on top of your pizzas, on your sandwiches. Make things like bean dips and chickpea dips as a great way to get protein, but also get the benefit of the garlic within it too.
Wow. Yes. So many different options. And I'm thinking like multiple types of spices in each one. So, okay. So back to our remarkable cancer survivors. People would know that I'm just reading this book right now by Jeffrey Rutledge, who's a psychiatrist and basically has interviewed a lot of people who've undergone the true kind of spontaneous remissions. And his takeaway is there's 4 pillars of health, including healing your nutrition. And again, I really thought that he did a very balanced and scientific perspective on this. His takeaways are that there's no one kind of best anti-cancer diet. You just can't, I can't just say to you, you need to eat exactly like this, because we're so different in our microbiomes and our biologies and how we absorb food and use food within the body. And so he used the analogy of, you can't just give gardening advice. You just can't say, use this particular fertilizer and this amount. Each person's garden is different. Each person's microbiome is different. So again, this is where taking a little bit of time and doing the work and figuring out what works for you really makes the difference. So that was the point number 1 I thought was really well taken. Again, he's quoting Michael Pollan, again, eat food, mostly plants, not too much. And he talks about nutrient-dense foods. So it's like, be like the difference between eating white bread and, bread made with sprouts or, all the whole grains type thing. Because it's the same number of calories that you're kind of getting in there, but there's so many of the micronutrients in addition. So again, nutrient-dense foods, so you're feeding the whole system well. And then lastly, I was very happy to say that eat with a sense of gratitude. It's like, wow, eating is pleasurable. And so this life is amazing. This life is sacred. And so that kind of sense of feeding your life, feeding your soul with a sense of gratitude goes along with this kind of more holistic perspective. Okay, healthy swaps. This is kind of where the rubber meets the road, and it's like being quite clear about what's happening within your life. And so there's lots of different swaps here, right? We shouldn't be drinking pop. It's not good for you, period. So look for, the teas or the waters, or, stay away from the fatty cookies, and maybe use an apple for a snack instead. So you have these options for beans and oatmeal for breakfast. And one of them that I've had recently is zoodles. So it's zucchini noodles. You kind of squeeze it into this machine. It comes out as noodles, and then you can cook it, and it actually tastes great. Beyond that, got in the farro on our roasted vegetables, popcorn for chips, apple, etc. So do you want to add another healthy swap or another idea around that, Erin?
Yeah, there's even ways that, we can make something like a cookie be a way to even get in whole grains. So there's a way that you can use like oatmeal and some almond flour and use maybe a little bit of date for sweetness. There's definitely some really great recipes out there these days that if this feels intimidating in terms of swapping out everything in your diet, there's definitely like baby steps that we can take to get choosy here. Yeah.
And the other takeaway is this is around baby steps, right? So I wouldn't recommend you do this all in day one. This is something that you slowly transition, and we're going to talk about that shortly. Dairy, Erin, good or bad?
Yeah. So again, this one's complex. And especially with meat and dairy, when we're looking at the agricultural industry, that's a complex topic. It's a political topic, it's an environmental topic. There's lots to talk about there. But when we're talking about nutrition specifically, we have seen some associations with diets that contain a lot of higher fat dairy. So we're looking at ice creams, a lot of cheese, whipping cream, that kind of thing, having some associations with cancer. Not as much the lower fat dairies, but definitely the higher fat dairies, there has been an association, and that's over a long period of time, right? And there are lots of environmental reasons that it could be great to cut down on our dairy consumption, and also getting in other nutrients. So it's not just about the dairy, but are we having dairy all day and not then getting other whole grains and not getting in enough fruit and vegetables and other sources of protein? So if you are deciding to cut down on your dairy, do get some help so that we are replacing the calcium and that we're replacing the protein that we're used to getting in some dairy products. But there's lots of great ways to switch. There's lots of ways to make things creamy. There's lots of ways to make things delicious and protein rich and filling. So please do connect with someone if you'd like to change your dairy.
Yeah, I mean, I like this idea of this nutrient dense. It's not nutrient dense. You could be getting that protein or the healthy fats in other ways with all those other micronutrients. So limit the high fat stuff. And then we were talking about making sure you have enough calcium in your diet. And again, that's why it's important to talk with a professional, have your diet assessed, make those changes if need be. And some calcium-rich foods, there's lots of them, right? Get your green leafy vegetables, for instance. Shopping. Okay, so now the rubber's hitting the road, right? And I really think that we can do well if we shop well, make that plan, be proactive, love yourself. So big picture is make a plan, know what you're going to do when you get to the grocery store. I think we humans are, oftentimes slaves to our limbic system, right? It's like when I'm hungry going into the grocery store, I'm much more likely to get that chips or the unhealthy stuff. So it's important to make it, make the decisions when you're clear thinking. We're going to talk about reading the labels here in a moment. I think it's important. Without reading, you won't necessarily know. And then if you don't buy it, like what I find is at 10 o'clock at night, if I don't have any junky food in my shelf, it's really hard for me to eat junky food. So, and just which reminds me, if you do have some junky food in your house, and we all do, it's okay to have, the occasional, snack like that, put it in a place that's out of sight and slightly inconvenient, because the limbic system, again, if you have it on the counter, you'll eat the cookie before you actually know what's happening. So again, be smart about it. We all have our limits. We want to be smart about our shopping. I took a picture of my oatmeal ingredients this morning. So I read that. In fact, I changed over to this oatmeal after reading the ingredients list. So essentially whole grained oats, groats, chia seeds, amaranth, hemp seeds. I didn't know about the sorghum flour, but it sounded like flour. So, and rolled quinoa. So it's like, that sounds like food. It sounds like, healthy. There's no chemical there that, could irritate my gut. So I thought this is a good food to choose. And obviously the problem is well, many kind of processed foods have sugar as the first or second item on the list, and that's not a good starting point for your healthy foods. Any reflections, Erin, on this?
Yeah, and do a little bit of research in terms of what's considered sugar, because the industry has gotten very savvy of knowing that people are looking out for sugar. So whether it has like corn syrup or high fructose, just kind of maybe do a little bit of research in terms of what's considered a sugar, and so that you can know what to look for on labels, because they've gotten quite savvy.
Yes, around that, yeah. Efficient preparation. I think you were kind of inferring maybe Sunday's the day where you kind of spend some time, like 2-3 hours, and make several batches of the same thing. So it becomes very convenient, like the pre-chopped vegetables, or a stew or a pot of whole grain or that type of thing. Further reflections there, Erin?
Yeah, because this really makes it so that the healthier foods are really the easiest choices when it comes to mealtime. So if you already have sauteed veg in the fridge, if you already have some roasted veg, if you already have some grain prepared, A, we want to use it up, and B, it's less work kind of during the week if you're working or if you're going to school. Just having it already done makes it so easy. There's a couple of really good guides out there too in terms of pre-chopped veggies, how to keep them in your fridge so they last for a little bit longer. Please reach out if you'd like any of those resources.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. Frozen foods. Is it true frozen foods lose their nutrients?
No, actually, frozen foods lose very little nutrients in the freezing process. And actually, excuse me, during the winter time, I recommend frozen foods over getting produce that may have been shipped from pretty far away. Because when we're thinking about when, an avocado has gotten to us, by the time it's left Mexico, it's always, picked when it's unripe. So it hasn't had the maximum nutrition that we can get from the sun when they're unripe, and it's shipped to us, and then it ripens along the way. Versus frozen foods in the wintertime, the foods have generally been picked in the summer when they're at their peak ripeness, and then they're flash frozen. And so that's a great option. Plus, it's so convenient. They're already cut up. It's really great to just throw in the oven, throw in a soup. I think we have some examples here, but frozen, please don't have a stigma around frozen foods. They're especially frozen fruits and vegetables. They're wonderful sources.
Yeah. And that was like an aha moment when I figured that one out, because it's just so convenient. It's right there. Get it into the frying pan, the oven, just heat it up quickly. It's a knockout from my side. I happen to be a blueberry-aholic as well, so I'm big on that side. And that's very similar to what I pulled out of my fridge yesterday. In fact, I got my lunch from today almost going, but when I ate something like that last night, and just a few little spices, and it tastes fantastic, cooked in some avocado oil. Lots of other options. There's obviously the berries that we're talking about. The cruciferous, super important. So the broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. You can get your proteins right from green beans, peas, spinach, all very easy. There's now great new products like cauliflower crust pizza, right? Veggie burgers made out of healthy foods. You get the soups going in your fridge. You have those as separate little meal allotments. Okay, so we're going to finish off with just a few examples from healthy breakfasts. Do you want to riff on this one a little bit, Erin?
Sure, yeah. So these are just some examples of how we can combine those whole grains and or those carbohydrates and the proteins and getting enough for breakfast. So an example would be your oatmeal. So a lot of us tend to just have oatmeal on its own, but we might get a little bit hungry after that. So one little tip is notice how long your meal is lasting you. Is it lasting you 2 hours? Is it lasting you to your next meal? We really want our meals to last us between 3 and 5 hours. We all have different metabolisms, but we would like to aim for 3 to 5 hours. So if you're hungry an hour or two later, we need to bulk up that meal. So say oatmeal, then you can add some plant milk. You can add your frozen blueberries like Dr. Rutledge loves. And then for the protein, I like to add things like chia seeds, hemp hearts, ground flax. Within those, you're getting super healthy fats, you're getting fiber, you're getting protein. So those are things that I even leave. I know you're supposed to keep them in your fridge, but sometimes I leave small amounts on my counter so that they're easy, they're there. And then I just add them to my oatmeal in the morning. Nice. An egg frittata is another example, super high protein, and then you could use frozen vegetables within that. A sprouted grain bread. So if we're looking at the kinds of bread, we kind of go from a white to a whole wheat to a whole grain to a sprouted grain, if we're looking at the amount of fiber and protein. So sprouted grain breads, there's lots of really delicious ones out there now. They've really come a long way from, you know, the dry whole wheat breads that we had in the past. So really try them out. Adding a healthy fat like avocado with a bit of hemp hearts, as a bit of an avocado toast. Another example is the same bread, but you could put like a nut butter, like an almond butter, even a bit of peanut butter every once in a while is totally fine. And then chia seed jam is another example of a way to swap out. So if you're used to putting jam on your toast, try a chia seed jam. Just Google a recipe. Basically all it is your fruit. So I just take blueberries, frozen blueberries, put them in a saucepan. You might need to add a little bit of water, and then add a couple of tablespoons of chia. And then that just makes this beautiful jam-like consistency. And then as it cools, it'll thicken up. And then you really taste the blueberries instead of the sugar that we're used to in jam. It's so much more flavorful. And then we get used to that flavor rather than the higher sugar content jams.
Wow. Well, I think you put me onto sprouted grain bread now, because I've been staying away from bread, but I think I'm going to go that route. And I wanted to share you my breakfast because and I grew up on peanut butter and honey sandwiches, but I couldn't eat that into my 20s and 30s. I was getting too cranky and tired like an hour and a half later. So now it's oatmeal that you saw the ingredient label there, but then I add everything to it. So essentially you can't see it there, but there's mixed nuts, there's Brazil nuts, there's hemp hearts, there's flax seeds, there's banana, there's blueberries, there's raspberries, there's pumpkin seeds, and then there's mixed nuts underneath that. And for me, I have it's almost like I'm not hungry. I'm just like have normal energy for about 3-4 hours. And then I just feel like I'm a little bit hungry at that point and I can have lunch. So it's almost like I feel full and strong for those four plus hours after having that breakfast.
And good point, Dr. Rutledge, because it's not just about if you're full, it's like, is it giving you energy too, yeah. Right? Are you feeling a slump in your energy, or is it actually fueling you for that amount of time?
Yeah. And you can see I forgot to say that I got the organic raisins are on the left side of that picture. So product of Canada and the flax seeds. Examples of healthy lunch. Yeah, do you want to have a quick quick explanation there? Yeah.
Yeah. So this time of year, I'm a big fan of soups. If you have your group of who you're hanging out with these days, you can always do a soup exchange. So everyone makes a big pot and you exchange a couple of liters of soup. So then you have some different kinds in your fridge. But it's a great way of getting in those like chickpeas and those beans and mung lentils, super high in protein, and a really delicious to get some of those spices in as well. If you want a creamier soup and then you don't want to add at the moment, you can always soak some cashews. Blend up the cashews with the soup, and it really gives it more protein, but it actually gives it a beautiful silky creamy texture. Salad, so I tend to go more so for soups this year, but salads are always great as long as we get the protein and the fat in with it. So we want to make sure that we're getting some like nuts and seeds, or if you're having meat, having your meat protein with your salad. Avocado is a great source of fat and fiber on there. And then don't be scared of using a bit of olive oil on your an olive oil type dressing on your salad as well, even with some of those spices as a way to get some of them in. And then an easier way of doing more of like a charcuterie type of thing is to make some hummus or buy some hummus, and then buy some of those whole grain crackers. There's some great whole grain crackers out there now that have a really good amount of fiber in them. And then that can be another way of getting the protein and the fiber plus your veggies and some fruit.
Wow. I'm just getting hungry. Now, evidently, I'm not going to be a food photographer. That's my lunch on the left side from days ago. An absolutely wonderful recipe. Essentially, cauliflower, chickpeas, curry with salad and whole grain rice, and then you can see the guacamole on the left side. And yes, I do have some potato chips there in the background made in avocado oil. So that's a lunch for me, and I eat an apple afterwards. Okay, examples of healthy supper. Right. Yeah. I mean, again, maybe less volume. What do you think, Erin, in terms of supper time?
Yeah, it depends on the day that you've had. And if you're actually tending towards more of less meat in your diet, sometimes we need to eat a little bit more, depending on how we're feeling, depending on our energy.
Yeah.
But things like curries and or chilies are great this time of year. The bootables that you may have seen out there, they're really not difficult. I had someone this morning ask me like, hey, Erin, how do I make one of those bootables? But basically, it's by doing a bit of that prep that can really make bootables really easy. So you just have a grain, you've got your veggies, you add some protein, and then in your fridge, make 1 or 2 or 3 different dressings that you really like that you've made yourself. And then you're more likely to go to it, right? If you have a really delicious
Nice.
accompaniment to it. Yeah. And then lentil walnut tacos I put in there just as an example of, if the whole plant-based protein is new to you, try a meatless Monday. Try 1 night a week where you're trying a meatless meal. Even try putting, if you want to do, if you're used to doing like a chicken taco, maybe put some lentils or some beans in with it. So you're doing 50-50. In the next chili that you make, maybe up the bean and the lentil protein in it. And if you really need some meat, really try to decrease it and see if you notice a difference. So just experiment, take it slowly. There are tons of, I think Dr. Rutledge has them at the end, but tons of great websites now with really healthy, tasty plant-based protein ideas.
Excellent. Right. So there it is. Lots of colors is the other kind of principle there. Very smoothies. Smoothies are, convenient and a real opportunity to get in some micronutrients that we may not get otherwise. Do you want to talk about the kind of foundation here?
Yeah, so my smoothie always looks really different from my husband's. His is a little bit more like a milkshake, but he calls it a smoothie. And I was like, okay, this is an opportunity for us to include those various colors. So I'm glad you brought up color. So our different colored fruits and vegetables actually indicate different kinds of antioxidants. So that whole old eat the rainbow message has some good merit to it. So this is an opportunity to get in some different kinds of berries. Again, frozen is wonderful for smoothies. Half of a banana can help with that sweetness that we sometimes crave, or you can leave it out. You could use a plant milk, or if you're eating dairy or your own milk, you could use that as well. Yogurt. So we didn't talk about yogurt with dairy, and I saw one of the questions pop up around yogurt. So yogurt, if of all the dairies, if I'm going to recommend one of the products, is going to be yogurt, just because of the probiotics and the evidence that is there around the probiotics that are in yogurts. I always go for a natural yogurt that's unsweetened, like a plain yogurt. But it's a good way to get some protein in there, a good way to get some probiotics. Then add in a little bit more protein. We don't want to have too much carbohydrate in a smoothie. We need to make sure that we're balancing that out like we talked about before, making it a slow burning fuel, basically. So chia seeds, ground flax, hemp hearts. If you're thinking about that oatmeal, basically add the things into your smoothie that you would to that. And then you can also add things like cocoa, ginger, spices to make it flavorful.
Yeah. And I make the same thing, basically turn it into a green bowl, and that way I can add the extra seeds and nuts and hemp hearts and all that stuff without having to emulsify them. Okay, so the last few issues. So ketogenic diet starves cancer. Do you recommend a ketogenic diet, I guess is the question.
Yeah, so I get this question a lot, and I've actually specifically really looked at the evidence around the ketogenic diet. Currently with cancer, there's not a lot of good evidence around the ketogenic approach. However, there is evidence around specific conditions such as epilepsy. But I think what gets really confused is that a ketogenic diet that we see in the mainstream is very different from an actual therapeutic ketogenic approach that we've seen the benefits from in the science and in the evidence. So it's a very strict diet in terms of really getting the ketones and the ketoacidosis in the right ratios for the benefits. And for me, doing this work now, and I mean, I've been a dietitian now for 15 years, and all the evidence that points to the benefits of antioxidants and also fiber, especially in the cancer world. I do get concerned that a ketogenic diet really cuts out most fiber. usually causes constipation, and then doesn't include a lot of the fruits and vegetables that have really high antioxidants. What I have learned is that if one were to do a ketogenic diet, that you actually can't get all your nutrients from a ketogenic diet. It has to be supplemented. So for me, I really like to look at how can we take that idea around lowering the blood sugars, but make sure it includes lots of nutrition. So for me, it's really not about saying that I'm one thing or the other. It's about how many nutrients am I getting in, and how is it working for my body? Because one thing we haven't talked about too is like there's lots of other factors in terms of your digestion, your tolerability, like food sensitivities, where you're at in your current diagnosis, and things that could be affecting what you can eat and tolerate. So please reach out, discuss this, explore it, bring the questions. Whoever you meet with should be open to really digging deep to see what will work best for you.
Yeah, excellent advice. Really, we're individualizing is really the takeaway. So I'll leave that slide up there as the description of what the keto diet does, but it is missing many of the antioxidants. So that's a question in the issue. How about a vegan diet? Do you agree with my approach?
Yeah, so the thing at Inspire Health that we recommend is plant-based, and that means more so not necessarily vegan, where you can definitely have a very nutrient-dense diet on vegan, and it's not always appropriate for all of our patients, but we like to focus on plant-based. So that just means that a majority of the foods that you would eat would come from plants and whole food sources. So you can do a vegan diet in a very healthy way. I've also seen a vegan diet, like we said before, not have the nutrition that we need. So please get some support, please do your research. And the research can be confusing in terms of if your research is Google, right? So please seek out some advice and some support to filter through that, because as dietitians, we love to do that. We love to filter through all the research and really look at, like, will this work for you, and make sure that you're getting all those nutrients in. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to follow a vegan diet. You don't have to follow an omnivore diet. Let you out what nutrients you're getting and what nutrients might be lacking.
Yes. Perfectly said. Yeah. So I would just say, again, I would prefer this, but it really means that you have to eat from multiple food groups and, the healthy options, the whole grains, et cetera, there. So get support is the takeaway from that slide. Oh, we're leaving the tough ones till the end. Is chocolate good or bad?
Yeah. So chocolate, cocoa, basically, that chocolate is made from, cocoa itself has some good antioxidant properties, and actually some good flavonoid properties that we've seen beneficial and anti-inflammatory. However, when we've transferred them over to being chocolate or chocolate bars, we've lost a lot of that. However, if you go higher up in the chocolate percentage, cocoa percentage, don't go too high, because once you get to like 90%, I just find it really difficult, and then I just don't get the enjoyment. But also, don't deprive yourself. So I think a big thing around chocolate is, what are you craving? Are you craving the chocolate itself? Are you craving the flavor of it, or are you craving the sugar? And why are you craving the sugar? How can we incorporate chocolate, because it is such a delicious food, and I'm big into food and flavor. It's delicious, it's satisfying. How can we incorporate it in ways so that you don't feel restricted in it, and not cutting it out completely, because we always have more. We always end up having more if our body feels restricted. It's a very natural physiological cycle. So if this is important and joyful for you, then how can we include it in a way that you can enjoy, and that your body doesn't end up having those cravings?
Yeah, wonderful. Slowly, mindfully, and using the smarts around all this in terms of how your body particularly works. So, soy, good or bad?
Yeah, this one's a bit complex. So soy had a really bad reputation there for a little bit, because it has plant-based sources of estrogen. So those are called phytoestrogens, phyto meaning plant, and then the estrogen. So what we've seen, though, is that when we're getting these estrogens from whole foods, so flax also has phytoestrogens in it. Walnuts also have some phytoestrogens in it. There are many foods that have these small amounts of phytoestrogens, that they actually help to regulate our hormonal balance within our body. There is a little bit of a need for a conversation. If you have triple positive estrogen positive breast cancer, please have a conversation with your oncologist. But other than that, we've seen that they're a wonderful food to include. We want to include them though in their traditional forms. So that's tofu, edamame beans. I love buying frozen edamame beans that are either in the pods, my little guy loves them, or out of the pods, because they're great to add to salads. They're great to add to like stir fries and things like that. They're delicious. They're less, people that don't like beans because of the pasty texture of beans really like edamame beans because they're a bit crunchier and they're easy to cook. They only take a couple minutes. And then tofu, edamame, natto, I think I've got them listed there. Miso is another example. And they're a really great way also to get fiber in. I do recommend organic with soy. So I don't feel that there's a need to eat everything organic in your diet. That's a big topic. But when it comes to soy, because it's a huge crop that is grown around the world, and because it's always often grown on its own, there's usually more pesticides. So because there's not a big difference in price between organic and non-organic soy, I definitely recommend the organic when it comes to soy.
Great advice. I would say it's a healthy foods, and as long as you eat in moderation, I think it's a great option. Big picture. Is organic necessary?
Yeah, so again, this one gets to be a big topic because I always like to think, if possible, if you have a local farmer, that's always best to me, because you can have a conversation and you can ask their farming practices and you can build some relationships in your community with your local farmers. So organic has less pesticides, so that's one of the requirements to be certified as organic. However, especially if we're looking local, it can be really expensive to be certified as organic. So always have a conversation with your local farmer. And if not, there are some good guides out there. So some produce you might think are really highly sprayed, but they're actually not. And there's people out there that have actually done this research for us and keep current on it every year. So there's a guide, that's a good guide to kind of look at, but just don't let it cause too much stress if you're looking at it and you're thinking, oh, this is something I eat all the time. But the Environmental Working Group, so EWG, has this guide that's called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. So basically it tells you the top 15 foods for this year that have the least amount of pesticides. And then it also gives you the top 12 that have had the highest pesticides this year, because it changes year to year in terms of farming practices and what's going on in our environment. So I think that's a good list. And again, I wouldn't say get stressed by it. I would say look at it and say strawberries are always on the Dirty Dozen, because it makes sense. In order to have those perfect little strawberries, we really need to spray them. So if that's something you include in your diet quite a lot, then maybe you might want to prioritize those, right? So again, it can be more expensive, but then just prioritize the ones that you consume a lot of in your diet, I would say.
Yeah, look for the quantity there as well. I'll answer this one. Can you alkalize your body, right? We hear about, well, eating lemons creates alkalization, and that fights off cancer. Well, I'll just debunk it there, saying, so when they talk about this, the idea is you're trying to change the acid-base balance or the pH of your blood. Supposedly, well, it's actually not possible, because you're either going to pee it off through your kidneys, you're going to blow it off through your lungs. So it doesn't really help, is that idea. Okay, so this is the transformational. So we're you've been hit over the head with a huge amount of information right now, which is great. We want to have that knowledge, but I would say slowly transition. Try the meatless Mondays. Try see which recipes feel good for you, and you slowly integrate that into your diet. You slowly get better and better at doing that. So. Again, try eating one veggie at each meal. Again, you're going to get some more expertise and experience around that. Just don't buy the unhealthy foods. I think that would be the takeaway. Look for the healthy swaps. A couple of resources. So there's Erin's amazing organization, InspireHealth.ca. Under resources and recipes, I think it's a list of about 30 plus wonderful recipes there. And the other one I wanted to point to was Gilda's Club in Toronto. There's a chef, Amy Symington, who's fabulous and puts out these little videos, and it's a community guide to cancer nutrition. So really adding some practical recipes to your list.
She has a great new cookbook too. Have you seen her cookbook yet?
Oh yeah, so that she just put that out like within the last year, right? Yeah.
The Long Table cookbook. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Wonderful. And lastly, I plead, because we are in the midst of environmental crisis right now, and that by not eating meat, we're actually, sparing the environment to a greater extent. So please consider that. It's super important. If we all do that, if we all stop eating meat, it would actually make a huge difference in biodiversity and energy and greenhouse gases, etc. There it is. Thank you so much, Erin. I learned again so much just by hanging out with you and hearing the various riffs. We will stop share. And Leila, do you want to moderate answering the questions? Do you want to read some of the questions, and then I'm sure Erin will be able to answer?
Is it possible to elaborate on low fiber diets and why it's often seen in women with ovarian cancer? And how does one manage a low fiber diet when also suffering from IBS, which requires a high fiber diet?
Yeah, so that one definitely gets some support. Reach out, have a one-on-one. So when we're looking at the low fiber and the connection with ovarian cancer, it's usually a diet that's recommended if there has been treatment. So the reason for that is depending on where the cancer was found, that we're worried about a potential blockage in the bowel, right? So we want to make things that are easier to digest, but there's definite ways that we can get lots of nutrition in on a low fiber diet. There's a lot of newer resources out there for more nutrient dense low fiber diets versus the white rice, white bread, white potatoes that you may have seen. So please reach out. I'm happy to get you some more resources around that. And especially when there's IBS, there's a lot of detective work that we could be doing together to try to figure out how to support your digestion.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Leila, I'm seeing a really good question here. Is it okay to use plant-based protein powder? Something that I put in my smoothies, by the way. How about whey protein powder? Erin?
Yeah. So those protein powders are pretty highly absorbed, especially, well, the whey protein is usually pretty simplified if you're having it on its own. Check the ingredients whenever you're using a protein powder. Do they look like whole foods ingredients, or do they look like they've added a lot of stabilizers and things like that? I prefer to try to get protein through whole foods as much as possible. I think our body just uses them better than when it's in a powder form. That goes kind of across the board when it goes for food. When we're talking about refined products, right? I just think our body uses it more when we've got all those other cofactors that we call them that are in the whole food.
Yeah.
So they can have their place, especially if you are in a time of healing and you're trying to increase your protein. But just look at the ingredients, and then if you can get it from whole food, I would say that's number one. But if you need to have some, I'd probably go for more of an organic, like sprouted grain kind of protein that are out there now too.
Leila, do you see one?
Yeah, we've got another question here. It's just about essential fatty acid supplements and whether or not those potentially interfere with any cancer meds, or if those are ideal to be taking.
I can't see how a fatty acid would interfere with the different mechanisms of cancer treatment. But again, I'm not an expert on this one. Any feel for that, Erin?
In terms of taking them, though, I would say there's quite a range these days in terms of the quality of omega-3 supplements. So if it's in a capsule, just like we talked about before, even if it's in a dark plastic container, but it's been on the shelf for a year, 2 years, please be wary of those ones, just because of the quality of the oil that's in there, right? Just from the rancidity point that we talked about earlier. If you're going to be taking omega-3 supplement, A, please talk to your physician and your dietitian, and then B, I would go for something that's been refrigerated. So you can get some higher quality omega-3 supplements, and just for sustainability, just do a little bit more research. There's lots of newer forms out there now too, even plant-based sources of oils, but it's best if they're either under a year or that they're refrigerated.
Yeah, makes sense. And I'm also seeing we are going to put this one up, right? So the slides are going to be available to everybody And the YouTube talk is going to be available to everyone, because I found this extremely valuable, just to try to go through this research and then have an expert comment. It's just been wonderful. So, I just want to reflect. Somebody says, in the COVID times, if you've been a chronic meat eater and, you can't find the high plant-based diet that comforting. So anyways, hats off to you to try to find the foods that kind of hit the psychological and spiritual spot as well. So, use this advice in a way that works for each of you. Like this is also a transition time where you can slowly, over months, transition your diet to something that's healthier and can feed your physically and psychologically can feed you. So yeah, hats off. I appreciate the tough questions as well. Thanks.
We also have a question here. So someone commented that most smoothies tend to have bananas as a prime ingredient. So what would be a good substitute for someone who either doesn't like them or can't have them?
Just take them out. I would say just take them out, add some more berries. Berries are berries are a lot lower in the glycemic index, like we were talking about before, and they have a lot more fiber. So I would just say, take it out and then just use some frozen berries for that texture. Sometimes people like that thicker texture from the frozen, that frozen banana gives, but if you use frozen berries, it'll give you the same texture. And, or if you wanted a bit thicker, I'd say add some cashews.
Smart.
Yeah.
Erin, are you a fan of this Beyond Meat products where they're, make hamburgers or hot dogs out of cashews and things like that? What's your feel for this?
Yeah, so there's a whole range, right? There's a whole range of veggie burgers out there. When we talked about soy, one of the things I didn't mention was that we try to stay away from soy protein isolate. That's one of the really refined soy products that is actually in a lot of the veggie burgers. So just watch for that. But then there's lots of really good companies out there now that are making some great veggie burgers out of beans and out of lentils, out of nuts, and lots of, there's a place here on the island actually where I live that's called the Very Good Butchers, but I think that they actually ship all across Canada, and their products are really like whole foods based. The Beyond Meat products, I kind of tend to think of them as like a convenience food in terms of if you are following a vegan or vegetarian diet, still treat them like a bit of a faster food. They still have some saturated fats in them.
Yeah.
So they're not like the holy grail of healthy foods, and they have less saturated fat than a meat burger for sure. So if you were to choose between those two, I'd say go for the Beyond Meat. And if you want to make your own bean burgers, they're actually super easy, a lot cheaper than the Beyond Meat as well.
Yeah. Makes sense. And it makes sense to me. You really want to use the whole product, right? The less processed is better any way you slice it. Quick one. How about whole grain sourdough bread?
Yeah. So, and I think there's a question there too about just like sourdough bread in general too. So for a lot of people that have some tolerance issues with wheat, sourdough can be a good option if it's a true sourdough. So if it's kind of made in your town sourdough, or if you make it yourself, there's some of those good bacteria that have broken down some of the gluten, so it's easier to digest for digestion's sake. And then if you're getting like a whole grain sourdough, I would say that would have more nutrition than a white sourdough because you're getting those whole grains. So I think a whole grain option would be great, especially if it's been made with like a traditional starter.
Anything else, Layla?
I think it's most of the more general questions. There's some more specific ones that I think we might just let people personally ask you themselves once we stop the recording here. I think that might work a bit better. So just to do an official outro before we move on to that aspect of the presentation. So thank you again, everyone, so much for attending the webinar today. And thank you especially to Erin for coming and presenting with us today. We really enjoyed getting to hear from your expertise on diet and nutrition. So thank you very much for joining us. This is one of many webinars we have scheduled for 2020. We still have some more going on. We have another very exciting webinar scheduled for tomorrow, actually. It's at 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so this webinar is called Listening and Learning with Impact, exploring ways to partner with those who are seldom heard. So in this webinar, our presenters will be talking about the importance of including the patient perspective in the delivery of healthcare services. So this will be presented by Elise Maybe, who is a patient partner, and Dr. Ambreen Sayani, who is a patient-oriented researcher. So you can find more information about this webinar and some of our other ones that are coming up on our website. So again, thank you everyone so much for attending. And if you want to stick around and ask any of your questions directly, you can do so.